The alien council, confident in their superiority, mocks the primitive humans, but something strange appears near their moon, a dot, seemingly insignificant. As they assess it, the unexpected happens. Gravity begins to reverse, and their entire perception of control shatters. A symbol of human power in silence begins its ominous rise. The alien council's chamber was alive with the hum of their technologies. The dark, cold expanses of the galaxy stretched before them, an endless void that reflected their sense of power. For millennia, they had watched over countless planets, having mastered science and technology far beyond the comprehension of most species. To them, Earth was little more than a curiosity, a species that had barely scratched the surface of the cosmos. Primitive, one council member sneered, scanning the data on the screens. Their technology is laughable, and yet they believe themselves worthy of attention. The others laughed, a deep, resonating sound that reverberated across the room. The data was clear. Earth was insignificant, a low-level civilization struggling to survive on a single rock orbiting a dull star. They had nothing to offer, and yet here they were, discussing the human race, because it seemed Earth was about to send a message. Not a physical one, but a signal. A human action, irrational and chaotic, one that could either prove the species' uselessness or something else. It was the smallest anomaly at first, a dot, barely visible in the dark expanse of space, just beyond the outer edge of their moon's orbit. At first, they thought it a glitch, something their superior sensors had misread, but as they zoomed in, the dot became clearer. It wasn't a sensor error, and it certainly wasn't a natural object. For a moment, the room was silent, a stark contrast to the earlier laughter. The dot moved, a slight shift in the vast emptiness. It should have been impossible, but there it was, steadily growing in size. "What is this?" the head council member Qatar demanded, a note of unease in his voice. "This isn't possible. We control gravity within this sector. There's no way for any object to just float here." The screens flickered, a pulse of light emanating from the dot as it slowly expanded. It wasn't just floating, it was affecting the space around it. For a brief moment, gravity shifted, distorted. The council members' expressions turned from confusion to sheer terror. "What the hell is happening?" one of them stammered. They watched in growing horror as the very fabric of reality seemed to warp around the dot. The gravitational field they had mastered, the one they had used to control the movement of ships, planets, and moons, it was reversing. Slowly, like the hands of a clock turning in the opposite direction, the moon, their moon, began to drift ever so slightly. Their empire, their pristine sense of order, all slipping away. "It's not possible." Qatar's voice cracked. "It's impossible. Gravity doesn't work that way." Yet the evidence was undeniable. Their once perfect grasp on the laws of physics unraveled before their eyes. The moon, once rigid and controlled, now spiraled out of its orbit. And still the dot, the source, hung in the void. There was no sound, no explosion, no immediate destruction. Just a quiet, creeping power that defied everything the council had ever believed. A realization began to form within them. This wasn't a mistake, a random event, or some cosmic anomaly. It was deliberate. It's human technology, Qatar whispered, as the horror of the truth sank in. They've done this. Somehow, they've reached a level of understanding, far beyond what we've ever anticipated. The silence in the room thickened, pressing down on them. The very stars outside seemed to blink in disbelief, as if the galaxy itself was waiting for something to unfold. And then, just as quickly as it had started, it all stopped. The dot was gone. Qatar stared at the empty space where it had been, his mind racing, a symbol of humanity's hidden power or something far worse. A chill ran down his spine, the realization dawning in the pit of his stomach. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't. The council, for the first time in their long, arrogant existence, felt the weight of their own ignorance. The humans were silent, but their silence was 1,000 times more terrifying than any weapon, and that was before Earth even responded. The Council's chambers were heavy with silence, the air thick with the weight of their unspoken thoughts. Qatar, the head of the Council, stood motionless in front of the large observation screen. The dot that had once been a curious anomaly was gone, but the implications were far from erased. The screen flickered intermittently, flashing traces of the bizarre event that had just unfolded. They had felt the reversal of gravity, an unstoppable force that had moved the very structure of their world. The moon, their prized celestial body, had drifted out of alignment, and they had no idea why or how it had happened. But they knew one thing for certain: it wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a simple error in their sensors. It was something far beyond their understanding. "Find it, now!" Qatar barked, his voice laced with urgency. His usual composure, so characteristic of the Council, was now replaced by a quiet dread. His fingers moved to the console, desperately pulling at data streams, searching for any trace of what had caused the unthinkable. But there was nothing. The dot had vanished into the void, leaving behind only the eerie calm of the void. What if it was an attack? One of the other council members ventured, their voice trembling slightly. But from where? And how? Who could have possibly? "Enough!" Qatar interrupted sharply, his patience fraying. "We are the masters of this galaxy. No one can challenge us like this." The room fell silent once again, but the tension lingered, palpable in the air. The council members exchanged uneasy glances, each of them caught in the same dreadful realization. Whoever, or whatever, had caused the event was not bound by the same rules they had followed for eons. It had found a way to manipulate the very forces that governed the galaxy. "You must understand," Qatar said, his tone more measured now, but still filled with a sense of unease. "If this was some primitive weapon, then it is beyond anything we have ever encountered. And if it was an accident, then we are dealing with something far worse. The humans have no right to possess such power." His words hung in the air like a dark cloud. For the first time in their long history, the Council was not in control. The galaxy that they had ruled over with such ease had been threatened by something they had never even considered: humanity. "But what does it mean for us?" another council member asked, their voice tinged with fear. "What should we do now? Should we retaliate? Should we send a fleet?" Qatar turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the room. The members of the council were clearly unsettled, their once steadfast confidence now shaken by the events of the past. Few moments. They had not anticipated this. No one had. And yet, here they were, wondering what the next step would be. "We cannot respond yet," Qatar said after a long pause, his voice carrying the weight of a decision made with great care. "We need more information. This technology, if it is truly human, could be more dangerous than we realize." He paused again, as though weighing his next words. The room was eerily still, and for a moment it felt as though time itself had frozen. If the humans are capable of this kind of manipulation, we must understand how it works. And we must find a way to neutralize it. We will not allow them to threaten our dominance. The council members nodded in agreement, their faces drawn with concern. It was clear that their confidence had been rattled, but the council was not one to back down easily. They had ruled for so long, and the idea of being challenged by a species so beneath them was incomprehensible. They would not let humanity's unknown technology slip through their fingers. "We will send a fleet," Qatar continued, his voice now cold and resolute. "A small one, to avoid drawing attention. But we will not sit idly by. We will find the source of this disturbance, and when we do, we will strike." The council members murmured in agreement, their expressions hardened by the gravity of the situation. They knew what was at stake. Their rule, their very way of life, was now under threat by a species they had dismissed as insignificant. Back on Earth, no one knew the implications of the Council's response. The human race was still blissfully unaware that their actions, or rather the actions of one seemingly insignificant human technology, had sparked a galactic chain reaction. The dot that had appeared near the Council's moon, now gone, was nothing more than a glitch, a mistake that had been created out of necessity. But the aliens had misunderstood it. They thought it was a weapon, a deliberate act of defiance. In truth, it was just a simple experiment. Dr. Laura Carson, a scientist working on an advanced gravitational manipulation project, had never intended for her work to make it this far. It was supposed to be a small-scale test, an exploration of how gravity could be altered in a localized area. She had wanted to see if she could manipulate gravity to reduce the friction between objects in space, making interplanetary travel more efficient. But something had gone horribly wrong. The equipment had malfunctioned, and a dot had appeared. In the gravitational field near the Alien Council's moon, she had no idea what had happened after that. All she knew was that the experiment had triggered something massive, something that reached beyond the realm of her understanding. She had never intended for it to be seen, let alone trigger a galactic response. But there it was, a symbol of humanity's raw, unrefined power. Her assistant, Raj, paced nervously around the lab. "Do you think we've done something terrible?" he asked, his voice tinged with fear. Laura stared at the blank monitor in front of her, the data long gone, replaced by an eerie emptiness. "I don't know," she said, her voice strained, "but I think we've just woken up something much bigger than us." Back in the Council's chamber, the mood had shifted. What had started as a confidence in their superiority now felt like a fragile illusion, one that was being systematically dismantled by a force they could not control. The alien fleet was already being assembled, but the Council's fear of the unknown loomed over them. Qatar, despite his usual calm, was anxious. His mind raced with the possibilities. What if humanity had unlocked a power greater than anything they had ever encountered? What if they had discovered a way to manipulate gravity, to reverse the laws of physics themselves? It would change everything. The very foundation of the Council's rule would be upended, their empire reduced to dust. "We need to prepare ourselves," Qatar said, his voice a low growl. "If the humans are capable of this, they could destroy us all. We must strike first, before they understand what they have, before it's too late." The Council members nodded, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. They were no longer the masters of the galaxy. The humans had shown them that in an instant everything could change, and they were terrified. The hum of the Council's chamber grew louder, vibrating through the very walls as the silence in the room thickened. Qatar stood at the head of the Council, his fingers flexing into tight fists as the gravity of the situation sank in. The fleet was ready, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. How could they have underestimated humanity so thoroughly? The humans, those primitive creatures, barely emerging from their barbaric past, had somehow triggered an event that shook the very core of their empire. The moment Qatar had ordered the fleet's mobilization, he had also ordered a covert investigation into every human activity, every insignificant anomaly on Earth. Everything had to be accounted for. There was no margin for error. The slightest weakness could cost them everything. But even as the fleet's ships readied to depart, Qatar couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom that had settled in his chest. "Fleet Commander Drax, report." Qatar's voice cut through the tension in the room. The large alien, his posture rigid, stepped forward, his eyes glowing with a deep blue light. "Commander Qatar," he began, his voice as cold and unwavering as always. "The fleet is ready for immediate departure. I've assembled our strongest vessels, including the Asterian-class destroyer, which can break through any human defenses. Qatar nodded, his gaze never leaving the console. That won't matter. What matters now is speed. We need to get there before they realize the threat they've triggered. We cannot allow them to gain any more ground. The humans won't even know we're coming, Drax said, his voice tinged with a hint of disdain. Their technology is insufficient. Their best radar systems are primitive. We can easily slip by unnoticed. Qatar's eyes narrowed. He couldn't afford to make any more mistakes. Unseen, yes. But the humans, they might not even realize they've drawn our attention yet. They might be biding their time, preparing for something. Do not underestimate them. There was a long pause as the weight of Qatar's words settled over the room. The council members, who had once viewed humanity as nothing more than an insignificant nuisance, now shared a rare, uneasy glance. The underestimation that had led them to this moment had cost them dearly. It had cost them their confidence. We cannot afford hesitation, Qatar finally said, his voice hardening. Once the fleet is in position, we launch. No delays. We strike fast, we strike hard, and we make sure they know that they are not ready for what's coming. As the council made their final preparations, the fleet of ships began to form a line, one by one, pulling into position just beyond the council's moon. From this distance, the faint glow of Earth was visible, distant yet ever present. A reminder of the species they had long dismissed as inferior. But now, that glow seemed to pulsate with something far more dangerous. The fleet's advanced cloaking systems activated, and one by one, the ships disappeared from view. They would approach Earth undetected, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. On Earth, the weight of the situation was barely felt. No one knew that an entire fleet of alien ships was making its way toward them. Dr. Laura Carson, in her quiet lab, sat before her monitors, nervously rubbing her temples. The events of the past few days had left her exhausted, but there was no time to rest. Something had gone wrong, terribly wrong, with her experiment, and now she was left to pick up the pieces. "What have we done?" Raj asked, his voice trembling. As he looked over the data on the screen, "We've triggered something that they've noticed." "I didn't mean for this to happen," Laura whispered, her voice strained. "This was never supposed to go this far. I just wanted to see if we could manipulate gravity for space travel, but this isn't something I can control." Raj's face was pale. "You don't think they'll retaliate, do you? Those aliens?" Laura closed her eyes, trying to suppress the rising panic. She had no answers. Not yet. But one thing was clear. The aliens had already responded. The fleet that Qatar had dispatched wasn't a coincidence. It was a deliberate move, a show of force. "We need to prepare," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "We need to figure out how to stop this before it gets worse." Raj turned to her, a look of disbelief in his eyes. "Stop it? How? We're not equipped for this." Laura stood up, her mind racing as she tried to think of a solution. There had to be a way to fix this, to reverse what had happened before it was too late. But the more she thought about it, the more the feeling of helplessness gnawed at her. She had accidentally triggered something that no one on Earth was prepared for. Suddenly the lab's door opened, and one of the technicians burst in, his face flushed with panic. "Dr. Carson," he gasped, "you need to see this. Something's happening to the power grid. It's starting to destabilize." Laura's heart dropped. "What? How?" "I don't know," the technician replied, "but the systems are failing. It's like something is draining the energy." Laura's mind raced again. The gravity manipulation experiment hadn't just affected the local field, it had done something to the planet's power infrastructure. It was as if the very essence of the planet's systems was being drained, ripped apart. "Shut everything down," she ordered. "We need to cut off all power to the lab before we make it worse." As Raj and the technicians scrambled to shut off the systems, Laura's eyes fell on the monitor showing a map of the planet. Her stomach dropped as she noticed the faint ripple of energy moving through Earth's atmosphere, spreading like a wave, moving outward toward the stars. She had inadvertently sent a signal that was far too powerful to ignore. She turned. To the others, her face pale. "We've just called them. We've called them to Earth." Back in the Council's fleet, Qatar stood at the helm of the Asterion-class destroyer, his hands gripping the cold metal of the console. His eyes were locked on the shimmering stars ahead, the silence around him pressing in. He felt no thrill at the approaching battle, only dread. The humans had done something that could destroy them all, and as the ships continued to approach Earth's orbit, Qatar realized something else. Humanity's silence, the very thing that had made them so easy to underestimate, was now their greatest weapon. They had created something the Council couldn't understand, something that could tear apart everything they had worked for. In the cold expanse of space, their fate was sealed. The silence of the fleet was deafening as the Asterion-class destroyer sliced through the dark void, its sleek form barely visible against the backdrop of distant stars. Qatar stood at the helm, his mind heavy with the realization that they had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would pay the price. The planet below, Earth, gleamed like a jewel in the distance, its blue oceans and white clouds unmarred by the violence that was about to unfold. But Qatar knew better. Earth was not the peaceful world it seemed to be. It was a sleeping beast, capable of destruction beyond anything he had ever anticipated. He could feel it, the weight of the unknown, the crushing power of something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. "Commander Qatar," Drax's voice cut through the tension, his deep tone reverberating in the cold, sterile chamber. "We are in position. We can strike at any time." Qatar's gaze flickered toward the screen, where the planet Earth loomed larger. It was time. There was no turning back. The Council had ordered him to strike swiftly, to neutralize the threat, before the humans realized the danger they were in. But now, as he prepared to give the command, doubt gnawed at him. What if this wasn't a weapon? What if the humans had done nothing more than trigger an accident? What if they were too late? The fleet was ready, its ships hovering in perfect synchronization, their weapons primed for destruction. But in the pit of Qatar's stomach, a growing sense of unease made him hesitate. The data streams continued to pour in from the ship's sensors, their readings flashing with frantic intensity. The gravitational anomaly that had first appeared near the Council's moon had not been an isolated incident. It was growing, spreading outward like a rippling wave, expanding into the fabric of space itself. And as it did, Earth's power grid continued to destabilize, its energy systems failing under the strain. "We need to stop this," Qatar murmured under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. The humans had done something. They had awakened something within the very structure of the universe itself. "Commander," Drax urged, his voice growing more impatient, "we cannot afford hesitation. We've come this far. The fleet is ready. We must act now." Qatar clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He could feel the weight of the Council's expectations pressing down on him. If he did nothing, the consequences would be catastrophic, but if he acted, would he be sealing their fate? As the tension mounted, a message flashed across the screen, a simple transmission, encrypted and nearly impossible to decode. It was a human signal, weak and fragmented but unmistakable. The message, when finally deciphered, was chilling. "Stop, please," it read. "We don't know what we've done, but we can fix it. Just give us a chance." The words seemed to hang in the air, reverberating within Qatar's mind. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. He had expected arrogance, defiance, even rage from humanity, but instead he heard fear, and a desperate plea for mercy. Qatar's heart raced. As the realization sank in, the humans weren't the ones who had caused this. They were as much victims as they were perpetrators. This was not an attack. It was a mistake. A misstep born from their curiosity, from their desire to push the boundaries of knowledge. The fleet hovered on the brink of annihilation, but Qatar hesitated. He had the power to destroy Earth, to wipe the humans from existence with a single command. But in that moment, he knew he couldn't do it. Not when there was a chance, however slim, that the humans could fix the chaos they had unleashed. "Hold your fire," Qatar ordered, his voice firm but tinged with uncertainty. "We will not strike, not yet." Drax looked at him in disbelief. "Commander, this is insubordination. The fleet is ready. We must—" "I said, hold your fire." Qatar's voice was sharp, commanding. "We are not the executioners of the galaxy, not unless we have no choice." The tension in the room was palpable. For a moment, the fleet stood still in space, caught between destruction and mercy. The alien council's plans were crumbling before their eyes, as the very creature they had once dismissed now held the key to their fate. As the fleet remained in orbit, suspended between action and inaction, Qatar's mind raced. There was still a chance to understand the humans. There was still time to fix what had gone wrong, but if he made the wrong move, there would be no turning back. On Earth, Laura Carson stared at her monitor, heart pounding in her chest. The transmission she had sent out, the desperate plea for mercy, had been received, but would it be enough? Would the Council listen? She didn't know, but she had to hope. As the power grid continued to stabilize and the gravitational disturbance began to fade, she knew that the next few moments would decide everything. The Council was out there, hovering in the dark void of space, poised to destroy everything she had ever known, but there was still a chance to fix the mistake, a chance to prove that humanity could rise above its flaws and create something greater. She had to believe it. She had to. The future of Earth hung in the balance, and all she could do was wait.